Welcome to the Gentleman's Guide to Vampires. I've seen many cities die, some before they even knew they were alive. Rome, for example, rotted long before the barbarians arrived at the gates. Constantinople drowned itself in incense, arguments, and sin. Jerusalem's an interesting one. You see, it's been murdered and resurrected more times than the angels can count. But then there's Montreal. Not a city that the layman would put on a pedestal next to all of those others, but still an incredibly significant domain to we Cainites. You see, it's a rare thing. It's a city that knows that it is damned and has decided, quite consciously, to build a cathedral out of that damnation. Montreal by Night is the only Sabbat sourcebook that understands this. Not in the crude sense that exists in other texts, chainsaws, shovel heads, cartoonish violence, and blasphemy, though there are all of those things present, but in the older, truer way. The Sabbat of Montreal is not merely violent, it is devotional. It believes, and belief, as any elder who has watched religion curdle in blood knows, religion is more dangerous than savagery. I say this not as an enemy of the Sabbat. Far from it. Nor as a sympathizer, however. I speak as a corpse who has listened to preachers for over a millennium and learned that the most terrifying words in any language are not "we hate you" or "we want you dead." It's "God wills it." Most Sabbat cities in modern nights feel like stage props, dens of brutality justified by slogans of freedom from the antediluvians, politics flattened out into a dull roar of nihilism. Montreal, by contrast, it's coherent. It's a theocracy. Not officially, of course. The Sabbat pretends to loathe hierarchy, even as it drowns in it, but Montreal's structure is unmistakably ecclesiastical. And what a plurality of belief in this domain. This is what Montreal by Night does so well. It presents all of these conflicting paths of enlightenment, all of these opposing religions, and somehow puts them in a state of semi-harmony, often war. Authority flows not merely from strength, but from interpretation. Who understands Cain best? Who reads the signs? Who can claim spiritual lineage rather than simple martial dominance? This is why Montreal by Night remains exceptional, and is partly the reason it was chosen as the city for Vampire the Masquerade chapters, the board game. There is so much embedded in the Montreal setting that the vampires who make their havens there become truly interesting based on context. It presents the Sabbat not simply as rebels, as the Sabbat often are, but as monks. Without monasteries in all cases, they're fractured orders competing over doctrine, relics, legitimacy, influence. The city, being Sabbat, is not ruled by a prince. There is a cardinal, of course, of Quebec, and the entire eastern region, Strathcona, and there is an archbishop as well in the form of Valeth. But it's less about the pyramidal hierarchy that you see in most cities and more about how each pack stands out, what each of them does to further their own philosophy. Packs are congregations in Montreal. Rites are sacraments. Monomacy is trial by combat with eschatological consequences. Dare I say it, but later portrayals of the Sabbat in Mexico City by Night, which has some strengths, and other sourcebooks too, moving into V5, they sand this down, emphasizing, well, nothing that strikes me as terribly substantive. Montreal has both shock value and substance, and that's a very rare pairing. And it's what makes the City Sourcebook so captivating to read. It is a lurid study. You pore through the text and you are horrified, you're appalled, and you maybe even are a little turned on, because it presents horror in a serious fashion, in a way that can be understood, albeit through the lens of, self-reflection. You look at it and you think, how would I survive in a city like this as a vampire? What philosophy would I adopt? Where is my base sin going to draw me? It justifies itself. And that's where Montreal by Night most sharply diverges from other Sabbat portrayals. In some editions of Vampire the Masquerade, the Sabbat's religiosity becomes either ornamental or ironic. Cain is a mascot, theology is a pretext, the sword of Cain is wielded primarily as a political brand. This is how we see them in New York by night, it's how they are presented in Mexico City by night, and they have their places. Sabbat as politics is definitely worthy of exploration, but Montreal, it exists primarily as a faith. It's an ugly one, it's a fractured one, it's a deviant one, absolutely, but it is faith nonetheless. Humanity is not something to be escaped, but to be reinterpreted. Sin becomes sacrament, damnation is destiny. The curse is a calling rather than a punishment. Now, in my clan, as a member of my clan, I recognize this impulse. We too believe that understanding death would sanctify it. We too build libraries where others built armies. Which brings me to some of the pacts that you find in Montreal. The Librarians are archivists of blasphemy, one of the most misunderstood covens in Montreal by night. Many read them as eccentric scholars with Sabbat trappings, but this is a mistake born from paranoia. The Librarians are not simply scholars despite the Sabbat, they're scholars because of it. They understand that whoever controls doctrine controls the destiny not just of the city, but potentially the entire sect. Their archives are not neutral repositories, they are curated scriptures, heretical gospels, fragmented revelations, their own interpretations of the Book of Nod and Erciyes fragments. The Librarians decide which interpretations of Cain survive, which rituals are remembered, which lineages are validated. They're less historians than priests deciding canon. And that's a really interesting role for the Sabbat to occupy, when they're so often portrayed as mindless barbarians, slathering and ripping people apart, and the Sabbat do have a place fitting that archetype. The Librarians are an interesting inversion, I should say. They are a pack dedicated to study, to propaganda, and dare I say it, even to a form of sect brainwashing. Sometimes figures like this are flattened to background NPCs or plot devices. Montreal treats them correctly as ideological kingmakers whose power lies not in force, but in, well, memory. What happens when a librarian discovers a text validating a rival pack's claim to a divine favour? That's slightly more interesting than just a territorial dispute. What if a ritual long suppressed suddenly resurfaces? What if the Librarians are wrong about their interpretations? Or worse, lying? Do the rest of the covens of Sabbat have enough might to take this rather entrenched coven out by the root? As one who has watched my own clan vanish into footnotes and rumours, I assure you, archives can kill more thoroughly than fire. The Shepherds of Cain are one of the dominant covens of Montreal. Every religion produces them eventually, interpreters who claim to speak not merely about the divine, but for it. The Shepherds of Cain are neither obvious villains nor simple fanatics. They're unsettlingly precise because they occupy a believable niche. In a city where faith matters, someone will always claim to guide. And what distinguishes them from later Sabbat priests is restraint. They're not caricatures frothing at the mouth. They're persuasive, they're reasonable, they're terrifyingly sincere. And they interpret Cain's will not as a call for endless slaughter, but as a mandate for preparation. The Gehenna War is not an excuse, it is an inevitability if you want to tie it into V5. The city must be ready, the faithful must be hardened, doubt must be excised from the mind of the Sabbat fledgling. From my perspective, this is the most dangerous version of Sabbat religiosity. This is the Crusader mentality, which can be quite fun to play, but also horrifying to observe. They're not the loud blasphemers, but they're the calm ones, who believe history itself has already rendered its verdict. They are simply its deliverer. I would argue they deserve far more attention in play, and indeed, it's what I feel the V5 Sabbat book kind of missed out on. I hope you appreciate my flipping back and forth between in-character and out-of-character observance. It's very difficult to talk, Stefan, about Montreal by Night and remain in character permanently, but I'm giving it a good shot. Stefan, by the way, picked up a copy of The World Below in hardcover and requested a video on Montreal by Night, hence why we're doing this. I hope you're enjoying it. The Shepherds are, I suppose, connective tissue between the Sabbat's mythic self-image and its political reality. Remove them and the sect becomes incoherent. And that is my criticism for various portrayals of the Sabbat. But my favourite coven, my favourite pack within Montreal by Night is the Widows. You see, the Widows are utterly deviant, utterly morbid, and they best exemplify what is so great about the Montreal by Night book. They are disgusting to read. You have a Zimishi, a Toreador Anti-Tribune, a Serpent of the Light. This is a pack that is dedicated to the path of Cathari, represented within the book by the Rose, the Mistress of Montreal, Creamy Jade, and the Black Lotus. And each of them follows their path to sublime sin via a different route. Creamy Jade, for example, one of her objectives is, well, one of her beliefs is that innocence only exists within the young. And once a child grows, that innocence dies and everyone becomes a monster. And so she wants to preserve innocence, much as she carves things out of jade and marble, and so she embraces children. And she embraces loads of children, but she still finds that corruption persists, and so rather than becoming angels, permanently locked in stasis, they become miniature demons. You have, of course, the Black Lotus, who is not a native to Montreal, but is dedicated to the destruction of the beliefs of others, that only through understanding someone's beliefs, and therefore understanding their crutch, can you understand how to defeat them and rebuild them in a way that suits you, suits the city, but, of course, according to Black Lotus, suits their destiny, their fate, their spiritual place in the world. In this, she is the perfect Setite, except she doesn't hold Set dear. She is a Serpent of the Light. And the pack's leader, the Rose, is a sadomasochistic, sexual, deviant mistress indoctrinated into the Sabbat, but she believes that the evils of the flesh and how to manipulate them allow one to understand beauty, allow one to understand the purpose of immortality, eternity, and therefore she uses vicissitude on herself to look inhumanly beautiful. She's constantly changing her appearance. Any appearance you have of the Rose from one session to the next should have, well, them appearing differently. And I note that I referenced the Rose as her, because in the text that is how they are presented. But Montreal by Night does a funny thing. It's written, of course, prior to a lot of modern language, but it has characters such as the Rose who, by today's standards, would almost certainly be presented as transgender. So while Montreal by Night is very far from subtle, it's sledgehammer heavy, as it breaks your knees, your joints. your skull. It presents many progressive, many forward-thinking, many outre themes that other books do not. Some people would claim that Black Dog is responsible for this, but you should be aware that the Black Dog brand was applied to books after they were written, as a general rule. And the reason Black Dog didn't appear for V20 and V5 is because there is nothing published in the Black Dog book that can't appear now. In the past, that wasn't the case. It allowed an adult imprint. Some stores decided to stock Black Dog, some did not, but now there is no such risk of censorship other than what the authors and the developers choose to include in the book. So Black Dog is no longer necessary. So Montreal is often held up as the pinnacle of Black Dog, next to the similarly perverse clan book Barley and the Giovanni Chronicles, among others. Freak Legion as well, I believe. But don't get hung up on the fact that this was when vampire was truly horrific and edgy because of a label. There were many books that weren't Black Dog that explored this kind of material. It's just something people grow attached to. Nevertheless, one of the things I really enjoy about Montreal by Night is its gloves-off approach to horror, largely of a sexual variety, and not just in the text but also in the art. I don't think it's necessary for every single game, or even the majority of games, but sometimes you have a group when you're running a game of Vampire the Masquerade, or telling a story when we have a character set in the world, where you really wish to terrify a group who have consented to this kind of material. Montreal by Night does not handle itself sensitively, but does address this material as if it is horrific. And that occupies a valuable place in the Vampire the Masquerade canon, in my view. In a similar place to a game such as Cult Divinity Lost, where you get to explore horror as an unbridled nightmare. The vast majority of the Cainites within Montreal by Night are nightmarish. From the, I was about to say quadriplegic, but is in fact limbless toy that somebody kept in a treasure chest that shovelheads or fresh embraces are sometimes dumped into, to the almost beautiful feral monster Celeste and Irinyi, Sangri the Serpent, of course, who is operating in the background. They all have a place, sometimes slightly more political, sometimes more fundamentally religious, but that focus for each pack on different paths of enlightenment really illustrates elements of the Sabbat that only ever really get covered elsewhere in, oddly, Giovanni Chronicles 2. In the Black Monastery, when you start seeing how the different paths of enlightenment are being founded, you compare Giovanni Chronicles 2 and the foundation of the paths of enlightenment with Montreal by Night, almost see how vision became fulfillment, and the fulfillment is often a great deviation from what was originally envisioned. Stefan wanted me to talk about Montreal by Night because it's their favourite Vampire the Masquerade sourcebook, and wanted me to point out various characters and packs and themes that I thought were strong. And I genuinely put Montreal by Night up in my top 3 of Vampire the Masquerade City sourcebooks. And it's taken me a while to do so. For a while I bounced off of the material, I bounced off of the imagery, I thought this is just edgy and puerile. But the more I have come to run games, not just that, but the more I've come to, I guess, read subtext and find value in controversial material, the more I've come to appreciate Montreal by Night. There's certainly weak points. It's not a perfect source book. But if you want a truly terrifying look at what the Sabbat can be, I recommend picking it up. And I will link it in the video description below so you can do so. Thank you very much for watching. And thank you, Stefan, for picking up a copy of The World Below in hardcover. If any of you are interested in requesting a video, whether it's about the World of Darkness or any other RPG I happen to have worked on or may want to explore, please also pick up a hard copy of The World Below and contact me through MatthewDawkins.com. I will be seeing you next time.